So over the last 12 months, I've been back to the UK 3 times: in June of last year, and in Christmas 2022, and then again in May 2023. And one of the things that struck me when I went back there is how expensive things are. Things like fuel, energy, and especially food. And I just want to do a bit of a comparison about the costs for me living here in China compared to if I lived back in England. And it's one of the reasons I continue to live here in China, because I think I can have a much better standard of living here. Now, although I live in probably one of the most expensive cities in China, which is Shenzhen, I still think it's considerably cheaper than if I was living in the UK. So let's start with housing. I live in an apartment which is about 140 square meters. It's a 4-bedroomed apartment. It's got 2 pretty big bedrooms. It's got 1 medium-sized bedroom and then a smaller bedroom, and then it's got a fairly large sort of living, eating area. And then the only thing that is a bit of a downside for me is it has quite a small kitchen, but that's pretty normal with a lot of apartments in China. Now, to give you an idea, I pay 4,200 RMB per month for this apartment, which is it's just under £500. Now, it's not in the centre of the city. However, last year they built a new metro line, so it literally takes me 25 minutes to get into the city centre, and that cost me about 60 pence for that metro journey. So I tend to live out, there's not a lot of other foreigners in the area I live in, but I actually prefer it that way. I'm not one of these who wants to live in a foreign bubble while I'm here in China. And the sort of next thing, that we pay a small maintenance fee because we live in a complex which all the gardening is done, all the rubbish is collected, etc, etc. So we actually pay about 260 RMB a month for that maintenance fee, which is it's about £30, and that, as I say, is for rubbish collection. They maintain the gardens, they clean all the communal areas, and that also pays for a security guard that we have on the gate. So you can't just wander in, it is pretty secure. That's generally how a lot of places are like in China. Now, moving on to energy. This is oh no, before I move on to energy, there's one other thing I want to talk about. So when you buy or you rent an apartment here in China, unlike the UK, there is no council tax, and that's quite a big saving, because even like 6 or 7 years ago, when I lived in the northeast of England, in a very just normal sort of 3-4 bedroom house, the council tax was like 160, 170 pounds a month. So that's something you don't have here. Although I mentioned we have this little maintenance fee, it's nowhere near what council tax is. So that's quite a big saving. Then if we move on to electricity and gas. Now, compared to the UK here, electricity and gas are significantly cheaper. I would say they cost here about 20% of what they do in the UK. So if in a year you were spending, say, £5,000 on electricity and gas in the UK, that would be around about £1,000 a year here in China. Obviously, being in Shenzhen, where it's very hot, we have the air conditioning on all the time, but rarely is our combined electric and gas bill over £100 a month. Maybe in the peak of summer, where we literally have the air conditioning on 24/7, it's maybe a little bit above £100 a month, but rarely does it go above £100 a month. And it's the same with water. Water is also extremely cheap compared to the UK. Now, one of the main reasons for this is that the electricity companies and the gas companies and the water company, they're all state owned. So unlike the UK, about 20 or 30 years ago, the government decided to sell off all those utilities, to private companies, and those private companies are not really interested in the consumer. What it's all about for those private companies is making as much money as possible for their shareholders. So they keep pushing the price up. Another massive factor that has contributed to high energy prices in the UK is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, UK government and the media will keep telling you that it's down to Vladimir Putin that he's cut off energy to Europe and the UK. That is strictly not true. It's actually the UK and the EU that have decided not to buy energy from Russia. However, they still do buy energy from Russia, but they buy it through third parties. It's bought from India and other places, and actually, so they are buying Russian energy. They're just buying it through a third party and paying much more for it. But the major thing is that here in China, the government will never let those kind of utilities be owned by private companies, because they see it as a service to the people. It's not something they make profit out of. It's something that is a service to the people. And I think that goes through a lot of things. If you take, like, for instance, mobile phones and data, it's significantly cheaper here. I think I pay about £10 a month for like, and I've never hit my cap. It's probably not unlimited, but it's fast 5G data, and I never run out. And again, it's because the telecoms companies are state owned, and they provide that as a service. It's not about making profit. If they make profit, it's a bonus, and they do make profit here, but that's not their first aim. Their first aim is to provide, you know, good mobile telecommunications to its people. And the next thing I can talk about is food, and this is something that absolutely staggered me when I went back to the UK last time, just how expensive food has got. And I think a couple of months ago, food inflation in the UK was running at almost 20%. And what you have to remember is inflation is compound. So, you know, if food inflation was 10% last year, so it's now another 10%, and that 20% is on top of the 10% of last year. So it is compound. So that's something you need to remember now. Here, food, if I buy imported foods, it's kind of, I used to think it was really expensive, but after now seeing the price in the UK, I don't think it's too bad, but it is more than local foods. Where if you buy local foods, rice, noodles, a lot of the meat, it is significantly cheaper here. Even though I'm in Shenzhen, which is one of the most expensive cities, it is significantly cheaper than in the UK. And recently I was in Inner Mongolia, in a very rural area, and I went into the supermarket there, and I've got to say the prices seemed at least 20 to 30% lower than they are here in Shenzhen. And fruit and vegetables in the rural areas are very, very cheap. There are some fruits here that are a little bit more expensive, like strawberries and cherries tend to be a bit more expensive. But on the whole, fruit is not ridiculous. Vegetables, meat, I think it's all cheaper than in the UK. As I say, if you do buy imported food, things like cheeses, milk's a bit more expensive. Generally, dairy products are a bit more expensive here. But on the whole, I still feel food is definitely cheaper than in the UK. Okay, so next, talking about food. If we want to eat out in a restaurant now, this is something that absolutely shocked me. When I was back in the UK, I took, there was myself and my wife, and we took my daughter and her husband out to Wagamama. Now, Wagamama is a Japanese noodle store. It's kind of very slightly level above fast food. It's nothing fancy, nothing special. Now, we had 4 bowls of noodle. We had 4 drinks, non-alcoholic drinks, just 4 drinks. And I think we had 2 side dishes, and it came to over £100. I think the bill was £102, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. Now, if we'd have bought a similar meal in Shenzhen, I can probably guarantee that would have cost no more than £40, if that. And it's quite easy for us to go out here, two of us, myself and my wife, and have a really decent meal for like 300 RMB. You know, we can eat sushi, we can eat you know, barbecue style food, we can go to a noodle restaurant, a fish restaurant, and unless we go to a fairly sort of high-end place, it's never more than 350 RMB, which is about 40 pounds, and you get a really decent meal that includes drinks, maybe a dessert. So yeah, it is significantly cheaper. And the thing is that in England now, to eat out, it's seen as a bit of a treat for many people, where here in China it's kind of the norm. Like Fridays and Saturdays, if you go out, there are literally thousands of families who are eating out in restaurants, and that's because it's very, very affordable. Now, the next thing I'll talk about is travel. And again, travel is extremely lower here than it is in the UK. So to give you an idea, often if I go to the airport, it takes somewhat between an hour and an hour and a half in a taxi or a DD. A DD is an equivalent to Uber. And that ride, as I say, takes an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the traffic. You know how much I pay for that? It costs me just a little over 200 RMB, which is about £23. That similar journey in the UK would probably cost me in excess of 70 to 80 pounds. Last time I travelled back, I got a quotation for a taxi from Heathrow Airport to King's Cross Station. £78 I was quoted. I was like, I'm just gobsmacked. And then we look, so as well as taxis and DDs, we have the metro system, which is like the London Underground. Now, again, I can literally travel from one side of Shenzhen right to the other side, about an hour and a half in total journey time, and it'll cost me about £1. A local journey, if I go from here to the centre of the city, which is, as I mentioned earlier, 25 minutes, costs me about 50 or 60 pence. And that's, you know, they're efficient, they're running like every 5 minutes, and they're amazing. And the third one, and if you want to go further, you travel between city to city, we have an absolutely fantastic high-speed rail system here. And again, it is a fraction of the cost of the UK. I recently went to a Fujian province, which is a 4-hour high-speed train journey from here, and it's little over 300 RMB. That's like £35 now. And a similar 4-hour rail journey in the UK will be significantly more. Even just from Peterborough to London, from where my parents live, back into London, when we were going to the airport, it was like, I think, £30 each for that one-way ticket, which is, you know, considerably more than here. But again, this is down to the fact that the underground metro system and the high-speed rail system is provided for the people. It doesn't make profit, and in fact, the high-speed rail system actually loses money. It's actually subsidized. But the thing that people misunderstand in the West, when they all harp on about how, the high-speed rail in China loses a huge amount of money, is that it's actually a government subsidy. And the reason why they subsidise it is because it has an effect on the whole of the economy, which is very difficult to measure. You know, people can now have many more meetings. Like if you look at the Beijing-Shanghai line, that's always busy. And often at sort of holiday times, it's difficult to actually book seats on those high-speed trains because they're so packed and busy. And we're just at the end of a holiday here in China. It's absolutely staggering how many people have gone to tourist areas. It was just like a sea of people. You know, I think the figures is like more than 750 million journeys took place over the space of a week. It's just absolutely staggering. And talking about tourism and travel, hotels is another you know, area which are cheaper. Recently, when we were back in the UK in May, I was looking for a hotel in London, and I ended up, we wanted a nice hotel, a sort of 4 or a 5 star, and I ended up staying near the O2 Arena because that was the only sort of place I could find that was not too far out of the centre that had a reasonably priced hotel. And we stayed in the Intercontinental, and it was £200 a night, and it was quite a small room. Now, I've stayed in the Intercontinental here in a major city. Last one I stayed in the Intercontinental was in Hangzhou, and that was just over £100 a night. The room was probably 3 times bigger. It was right in the city centre. I've also stayed in the Intercontinental in Chengdu, in the that largest building in the world, and that was less than £100 a night, and that was a beautiful room. The hotel complex was absolutely fantastic, and also if you choose a Chinese brand of 5-star hotel. So I recently stopped in a Wanda Realm hotel in Fujian province in Longyan, and that was like £45 a night, and it was an absolutely lovely hotel, really nice room, fantastic service. So again, being able to travel, and that's why so many Chinese people do travel, because it's not crazily expensive. Now, another thing I want to touch on in this video before I come to the end is there's a lot of stuff currently in Western media about, oh, there's a big you know, unemployment problem with young people. Now, yes, unemployment here is probably higher than the government would like it to be. However, I think talking to a lot of young people here, there's another reason behind this, is that when young people here go to university, at the end of their studies, because to attend university here is relatively inexpensive compared to the UK, when they've finished their studies, they don't have a huge amount of debt that they have to pay off. So many of them, instead of going straight into work, they will take a holiday, they will travel for a year or two. So like Western students will have a gap year. That tends not to be as popular in China. They will finish their university studies, then they will take time off to travel around China, or maybe, you know, just tinker about with something that they like doing rather than go into work. So this sort of figure of the unemployment of young people is somewhat skewed by that. I just wanted to sort of make that point. Now, I know that a lot of you will say, oh yeah, but the salaries are much better in the UK than they are in China. Now, I think that is true to a certain extent. If you go to the more rural areas, yes, the salaries are significantly lower. But if you come to cities like Shenzhen, and I think Shanghai and Beijing are similar, the big major cities, I don't think the salaries that a lot of companies pay are that much different to what Western companies pay. So, you know, you look at people who work at places like Tencent and Alibaba and Huawei, these kind of tech companies, they have very good salaries. And I don't think they're significantly different to salaries in Western countries. But the point is, your money goes much, much further here. Actually, Chinese inflation is currently around 1%, whereas if I look at the UK, it's like 7 or 8%, and it was higher than that last year. So your money goes so much further here, and I'm pretty sure if I was living back in the UK, there's no way I would be able to have the standard of living that I have by living here in China. And one last thing, you know, even for people who own cars here, currently I looked at the price of fuel in the UK, and it's currently about £1.60 a litre, and that compares to round about 95 pence to £1 a litre here in China. And again, that is because the government actually control the price of fuel here. The fuel price is set by government. Some provinces it may be a little bit cheaper than that, but here in Shenzhen it's about 95 pence to £1 a litre, depending on which one you have. Okay, so I hope that has given you a little bit of an insight into the costs of living here in China. As I say, I do live in Shenzhen, which is a tier 1 city, one of the most expensive cities in China. So if you did want to come and live here and you chose a sort of more rural or a second or a third tier city, you would find it cheaper than what I'm paying. So I hope this has given you a bit of an insight into what it costs to live here in China. But for now, as always, take care.